Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this webinar hosted by Next Labs and Infosys Consulting. Our webinar topic for today will be segregating data for joint ventures and divestitures. Just a few housekeeping items, points of logistics. This webinar will be recorded, and after the webinar, everyone who registered and or attended the webinar will receive a link to the recording. This link you can share with anyone that you think would find the contents useful. And you should be expecting that email from us with the link within the next 48 hours. If you have any questions during the webinar, there is a Q&A interface built into the Zoom webinar application. You should see a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can submit your questions both during the webinar, or we will also have a portion of time at the end of the webinar for live Q&A. Depending on the questions that are submitted, we may be able to answer these during the webinar itself, or we will answer them at the end of the webinar. But you can ask questions during the webinar or wait until the end. With that, I think that covers the housekeeping items. So thanks again for joining, and we'll get started. So just to go over what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to do a brief introduction of the speakers we have for the webinar, who I'm joined with today. Then we're going to talk about some of the data risks associated with joint ventures and divestitures. And then that will lead into some common practices to how to appropriately and securely segregate data and ensure privacy of corporate data. Then we've got some examples and use cases that we'll be showing, some demos. So we'll do the use cases and go through some live demos, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers and anything else that you would like to bring up. So with that, starting with the introductions, my name is Tony Burning. I'm a senior product manager here at Next Labs. I'm joined today by Nitin Agrawal, who is an associate partner at Infosys Consulting, and as well as by Ashwin Bhaskar, our principal software engineer, also here at Next Labs. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Nitin. Nitin, here you go.
Hello, everyone. For joint ventures and divestitures, there are definitely some data risks associated with it. If it's a case of joint venture or a case of a spin-off, there are shared systems that come in play. So in case of a joint venture, you have companies using same system. In case of a spin-off, you have the parent company's system being used by the company that takes over a part of the business. In both the cases, we need to make sure that there is proper segregation of data, because otherwise you may have violations of your agreements with the company, maybe agreements of the JV agreements or TSAs, or there is a risk of disclosure of intellectual property rights or proprietary data or confidential data, or even in some cases a failure to comply with regulatory requirements like export controls. So that's where in all these transactions for mergers and acquisitions, there is definitely a data risk which we need to address. There are also business challenges that we come across as part of these transactions. And the first one and the biggest one is the speed, because once you have a spin-off or you enter into joint venture, you cannot wait for time to set up independent or new systems, or you cannot wait for the company that has been bought over to be integrated onto the environment of the company or the buyer. So what we mean to say is there will be a time period in which, in order to achieve the fastest go-to-market or operate your business, you will have to continue using the legacy systems or the systems of the seller. And that's where there is a business challenge that you have to live with. Okay, in such cases, your access privilege mechanism becomes very complicated, because in case of a spin-off, you have an environment wherein it is shared between the seller and the buyer. You will have users who have moved from the seller to buyer. It's a confusion between when a user moved, what kind of legacy access has to be removed and the new access has to be created. How do you even segregate certain accesses in, let's say, an SAP world where some things are not even possible to be segregated so easily because of how the organizational setup is done in the systems. So all those really pose a big business challenge in terms of making the business operational in the new environment after the JV or spin-off on day one. And this is something that poses a key question on what is the fine line, or how do I protect my data and also sustain the business by sharing the data between a joint venture or a spin-off. So a fine balance or a trade-off between your need to share data as well as the need to protect data. The answer to that is a possibility using dynamic data level controls or dynamic access controls, which will give you a functionality wherein you can define your data sets and you can apply policy based controls to segregate data on the fly, which means whenever a user is trying to access data, there will be a check which will then control whether this user should be allowed to see or edit or add a certain type of data versus not be allowed on the same system. How does this whole thing work? You have a policy administration point, so which is basically a central point where we manage all the policies, we define the policies, we test the policies, and then we deploy these policies. You have a policy deployment point or a decision point. So this is the place where the decision of the policy takes place. So whatever policies we have defined in the manage part, the decision of those policies at runtime when the user is trying to key in some data or view some data takes place. And the last one being policy enforcement point or PEP, which is where the enforcement takes place. So let's take an example that you want to segregate data on an SAP environment wherein there are multiple company codes, some of which are from a sold business and some of which are from a business that has been retained. Now at a runtime when a user is trying to say run a report or enter some data, the policy will evaluate whether the user is trying to do for uh, a set of company codes that is retained versus a set of company codes that has been sold off. And based on where the user belongs to, which part of the organization, the retained one or the spinned off one, the system will then apply a check or make a policy evaluation and then determine whether the user should be allowed to see this part of the data or not, without requiring you to redefine the access privileges or the roles of the user and taking care of the reassignment of these privileges. Expanding onto a more complex example in terms of defining a common secure collaboration policy. If you see the example here is allow only manager who's a US citizen working in a specific division M in region X access to nuclear maintenance data in SAP ERP, and then the time dimension, which is during work hours from an office location and perform actions 1, 2, 3. So all the ones which are color coded either in red, green or blue are basically attributes that we use uh, in the policy, which are runtime determined attributes. So which means uh, the citizenship of a user is being determined at the runtime. So I am a user, I am trying to perform one of these actions, say action 1, 2, 3. At that time, the policy evaluation takes place. It will check whether I am a US citizen, whether I am part of division M, region X, and then it takes a evaluation call, and then the action performed is either if I meet this policy, the data will be shown to me or I will be allowed to perform this action. If I don't meet this because of any reason, say I am not a US citizen, but I still am with division MX, I will still be disallowed because if the condition is and I have to meet all of them, or if the condition is or, then based on what the condition is, if I am allowed, I will be seen allowed to do this activity. If I'm not allowed, it will block me either by enforcing an encryption or by filtering out the data or by masking the data. This is what we define as in the action that you want the system to take if the policy is disallowing a user. I spoke about attributes, all the color coded ones. So what we do in this data access control solution is we use different type of attributes. The first one being user attributes. These are attributes which you uniquely relate to a user. The type of, let's say, the type of user or the job function of the user or the location of the user. All these are user attributes. The second type of attributes are environment attributes. These are attributes which relate to how user accesses the system. Okay, or environmental attributes which are surrounding the system, like IP address, the computer ID or the workstation ID, the time at which the user is trying to access. The third set of attributes are resource or data attributes. So these are attributes which relate to the type of data or what the user is trying to do in the system. Is the user trying to access files which are confidential or which store confidential data? Is the user trying to access data for a specific company code? Okay, so basically the data dimension of what the user is trying to do. All these combined together will go into the policy. Evaluation takes place, and then the last piece being action performed. So based on the outcome of the policy, the action will be performed by the system, which could be either block access, completely wipe off the data from the screen, or filter out some data from the screen, or mask data, or there are varied kind of things that we can enable using this. Now with this, I will hand over to Ashwin in order to take these 4 demos so that you can realize the potential of the solution and imagine how it can become really useful in cases of joint venture transactions or spin-offs, that without requiring you to have massive amounts of changes to the authorizations and maintaining it on a constant basis because of the changes to the whole organization going on. How can you seamlessly do it with a data access control functionality?
Hi, in today's session, we are going to see how we can leverage NextLab's data-centric solutions to achieve data segregation and data masking to protect enterprise data in SAP ERP. Right. So we have 4 scenarios today across procurement, finance, HR, MM, and order to cash scenarios. So in procurement, we're going to see how we can effectively mask pricing information of materials in the purchase order documents. And in finance, we're going to see how we can achieve data segregation based on different company codes to which the users belong, where only a certain users from a certain company code can access their own company code's GL account data, right? And again, in HR, how do we achieve data masking dynamically for personal information of employees? Typically, a good example would be an SSN data in SAP PA20 or PA30 transaction in the HR master. And in the material management and order to cash scenarios, how do we protect our classified information in sales orders? Also, stop users from actually creating sales orders that they shouldn't be creating, right? Based on the different material groups that they are assigned to, right? So like we said earlier, the NextLab solution is more attribute-based access controls than role-based access controls. So we have assigned certain attributes for the users. In today's session, I have these different users here, demo user 1 to demo user 6, and they have been assigned different attributes for department, material groups, company code. These are the attributes that have been assigned to the users. Yeah. And the SAP authorization role for all is SAP all, because the NextLab solution can work, can enforce the authorization checks beyond the SAP's role-based traditional control, right? So now let's first see how we are actually assigning attributes in the SAP system. So here you have the department data. The department attribute is sourced from the SU01 transaction of the different users. And then once we also have, once you have the NextLab's solution in the ERP system, you also have the transaction where you can maintain different user attributes. Say, for example, here I have the different users from demo user 1 to 6 maintained, where I have different attributes with material groups, company code, etc. information. So this is one of the transaction that is delivered as part of the NextLab solution, and users can leverage this transaction to maintain attribute sources that if it's not available in the standard SAP system, right? Now, let's jump into the first scenario here now. So I have use case 1 here by masking or pricing information based on material groups. So we are going to see how different material pricing information is masked in the SAP system based on the material groups that the users have been assigned to. Right. So in this scenario, I have taken the example of a purchase order that contains these materials that you see in the description here, and they have different material groups in the material master. Right. So the demo user 1 and 2 are going to be accessing the same purchase order, and you can see how the pricing information is different when they try to access the system. So just to bring up the same point here, so demo user 1 has material groups brakes, forks, seal, and wheel, and the frame assigned to him, while demo user 2 only has the material group wheel Z wheel assigned to him. Right. So now let me quickly jump into the system and try to access the user 1. So I'm here logging into the SAP system as demo user 1, and I'm going to be getting into the transaction ME23N. So when I get into the transaction, so I have the transaction purchase order from my earlier access. So here you can see that some of the materials here have the quantity and the price marked as 0, right? So this is the effect of the NextLab's policy that is in place, which says you only get to access material price and quantity information of a purchase order for which material groups you are assigned to. Right. So this is for demo user 1, right? So let's try to open the same purchase order for the user demo user 2, right? So I have demo user 2 here. Yeah. And let me go to ME23N. Right. So when demo user 2 is trying to access the same material information here, you can see here at the top that he is allowed to see only material wheels, which is of the material group wheel, and which is in technically it's Z wheels in the table. Right. So you can see that here he is able to see only the material for R10005, for which he is allowed to have access to the pricing and quantity information in the purchase order. Now, how do we achieve this, or how do we bring up this masking solution with the NextLab's solution? So I'm going to be jumping to the control center. So this is the policy authoring tool, which is part of the NextLab's control center platform. So if you see here, I'm going to be navigating to the policies here, and let me just open the policy here. Okay, so I have the mask pricing information for users based on the material groups policy for this use case, right? So in this solution, so I have here the policy which says allow only purchasing department users to access to select data from the table here EKPO, and the mask fields are net price and the quantity, and the mask symbol is 0. So you can have your asterisk symbol, you can have asterisk symbol, or you can have a number like 999. It's up to customers to decide what they want to do. And if you see here in masking condition, I say material group not in the user's material group. Right. So this is a very simple policy which basically will evaluate the material group of the material to the material groups that is assigned to the user, so that the user can access only those material groups or the material that belong to which he has been assigned to. Yeah. So this is the first policy that helps us to achieve the masking of pricing information between the same purchase orders for different materials in the SAP ERP system. Right. So now let's have a look at the second use case here. Yeah. So coming to financial information here, right? So in this case, what I want to do is like implement a data segregation policy where users who have been assigned, finance department users who have been assigned the company code respective company codes can actually access only those line items for which for the company code that they belong to. Right. So I have demo user 3 and 4. Demo user 3 can actually access company code 1710, and demo user 4 can access the company code data related to 1010. Right. So let's get into the system and see what does a policy look like for this. Right. So I have here a policy which says allow only users in department finance. If you see here, the attribute is department is finance, and within this SAP system to access data in AC DOCA table, right? And you have the action here select, because user is trying to query the data in this case. And then you have the predicate condition, which basically says here where the company code, which is the technical name here, the company code is equal to the user's company code. Right. So let's see what happens in the system when I try to open a Fiori application, display GL line items for the user. Right. So let me log into the system as the demo user 3 first. So let me open the Fiori application. Right, so let me go to the display GL line items in general ledger. So I'm trying to execute this application wide open. Let's just head on go and see what happens here. You can see here the demo user 3, when he's trying to query the GL line items, he can only access company code 1710 data, even though there is company code 1010 information available in the system. So you can see that here the data is actually segregated, and you can only see all the data with respect to company code 1710 in this GL line item. So now let me try to log into a different user and access the same application and see. Let's see what happens for the other user, the demo user 4. Yeah, so let me open a private window. Where is it for? Display general item. So here I'm logged in as demo user 4 here. So I'm going to run the same wide open query here. You can see that the company code demo user 4 can only access a GL line item data for company code 1010, right? So let me do a side-by-side comparison. So you can see here demo user 3 can only access company code 1710, and demo user 4 can actually access only 1010, right? So this is achieved by a data segregation policy that we just saw, where in the user attribute for the particular user is primarily contributing to the access control or the to the GL line item data here, right? All right. So now let's jump to the third use case. All right. So masking of sensitive personal information like SSN and HR systems, right? So you can see here that SSN is a very critical personal information that should not be shared or should not be made available to all users in the SAP system. So how do you protect the SSN data? Right, so we can have a similar masking policy in the NextLab solution to just highlight the location of the SSN data in the system. Right, in SAP ERP in HR Master, the PA002 table contains the SSN information and the per ID field. So in order to achieve this masking solution, so let's see what is the policy that we need to implement. So let me go to the control center here again. right? So let me go back here. And I have the PII mask SSN data for all users except HR department users, right? So I have a policy here which says allow only users who are not in HR department, who are not in the HR department users, right? In the SAP H49, which is the SAP server, and in the table PA002 to select information. And in my conditions, I'm going to be saying data masking, and I have a partial mask here. So Nextlabs also supports partial mask. So if you want to say, for example, if you'd like to do a partial masking for a credit card data, you can also achieve do the same with the partial masking application here. Right. So we have PA002 and the field is per ID. Right. So now let me log into the SAP system and try to access the PA information with a user who is HR. So in my case, coming back to the slide here, just to see which user has been assigned. So HR is demo user 5. Let me log in as demo user 5 and see the original data first. So let me go in here. So I'm going to be logging into the SAP system. 49. So let me access the employee number here as 32. So I'm going to be selecting the personal data info type where the information is stored. You can see here the SSN number for the user is 856475965. Right. So demo user 5 is an HR department user. So he can actually see the original value of the SSN of an employee. Right. So now let's try to access with a user. Let's try any other user here. So let me take an example of the same user, demo user 2, who is not an HR user but purchasing. So when he's trying to access PA20 to see the employee same information, let's say 32. Let's say personal data. Yes, you can see that the SSN value has been changed with the partial mask here as 111 and 65, right? So you can, this is based on the masking condition that we have provided in the policy. So if you see here, it says basically beginning the 0 denotes the beginning of the masking element, then followed by the number of mask that you need to apply, and the last 2 or 3 digits, the last number of characters or digits that you want to reveal, right? So this is the format of basically masking the solution. If you see here, this mask is in line with the policy that has been applied. Right. So this is how you can have a dynamic data masking and protect critical and personal information of employees in the SAP ERP system. Right. So now let's go to the fourth and the final use case here. Right. So in this scenario, we're going to see how we can actually control the information and the sales order. Sales orders in the SAP ERP system, right? So if you see here, I'm going to be controlling the sales orders based on the material groups again, to which the users are associated to, right? So here, effectively, this is data segregation, as well as by virtue of the data segregation in the system, the user is not also allowed to create a new order in sales orders with the material whose material group is not associated with the user, right? Now let's go to the system here. So I'm going to go to the so let me start with an open user who is actually immune to the policies as a super user in an exception case where just to show some of the information here, right? So I'm going to go to FBA03 and let's try to open sales order 40 first. Yep. And you can see that here there is a sales order 40 that exists in the system and it has a material TG11, right? And also let me take another example of the sales order 220, and you can see that this is an existing sales order as well in the system, and it has a different material which belongs to a different material group, right? Now I'm going to be trying to execute the scenario as a demo user jumping back to the slide of user attributes again to recollect the attributes. So I have the user demo user 6 who is in the sales department, and he can access sales orders with items that are that has material groups as Z youth in the system, right? So let me now go here and let me log into the system as demo user 6. This is 5. Let me close this. Right. Okay, so I think I need to log in. Let me log in as demo user 5. Now let's log into the VA03 transaction. Oops, sorry. VA03 transaction and try to access the sales document 40. You can see that even though the system, the sales document is present in the system, when user demo user 6 is trying to access the sales document, he cannot access it. This is because of the policy that is in effect and which only allows users to access the material group Z youth. Sales order 40 does not have a material that belongs to the material group Z youth. Yeah. Let's try to access another sales order 220, which contains a material that has Z youth. Yeah, this material is belongs to the material group Z youth, and the user can access the particular sales order. Right. So now let's try to go and create a sales order for the user with the material that the user is not allowed to use. Session V01. If I go here, create OR, let me create the mandatory fields. Let me fill up the mandatory fields here. Payment term 4, and customer reference. Okay, once you fill these things up, let me just try to add the materials here. I'm going to add the existing material TG11, which the user is not allowed to access actually. And let me try to press enter. Yeah, you can see that the user is not able to create a sales order for the material which he is not for which he does not have access because of the attribute association of the material group to the user. All right. So now, how do we achieve this with the NextLabs solution? All right. So if you now coming back to the policies here. So you can see that here I have two policies here in order to control both material and the sales order. So one is where the user restrict access to the material master based on users material group. So this is one policy where you have the users in department sales have control on the table MARA, where again the predicate condition says where MATKL in the material group is in the users material group. Right. So basically what this policy does is it only allows the user to access materials in the material master where the material group is associated to the user attribute. Now this is one policy, and coming to the sales documents here, because here this is a linked access control here. So it's a similar data segregation policy where you have the policy which says in the SAP system H49 in VBAK table, which is the sales order header, when the user is trying to query sales order documents. So the predicate condition to be applied here is, let's say the VBLN in VBAP where material number belongs to the user's material group from MARA. So this is how you can control a sales document or any other business object in relation to the material group's association to the particular business object. Right. So this concludes our demo for today with the 4 scenarios that we have discussed today. All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Ashwin. Now we will open it up for Q&A. And there's already, I see there's already been one question that was asked, and thanks for answering it, Nitin, during the demo. But just to make sure that everyone is aware of it, the question was, do we need to set up a policy for each system or each user, or do we have a global setup concept as well? So, so the answer is that our solution does allow you the flexibility to define global policies as well as local policies, depending on what the requirements are. And if you have the same requirements for multiple systems, you can have one policy defined that applies to all of those systems. But if obviously, if you have different requirements for different systems, then you would want to set up different policies for each of those systems. So let's see. So questions. So another question is whether the NextLab solution needs changes after a version upgrade. I'll open it up for either Ashwin or Nitin to answer that question. And I'm assuming that the question is
sorry, I'll take that up. Okay. So I assume the question is about SAP version upgrades. Okay, the SAP system where we are running this. So it depends on a case by case basis, like any other solution. Okay, there may be SAP version upgrades where there is no change needed to the NextLab solution, or there may be some SAP version upgrades where you also need to upgrade the version of the NextLab solution or the plugin that gets applied to that SAP solution.
Yeah, and then the follow-up question is like, we're preparing policies.
Are we preparing policies based on different tables and fields? Again, you have a complete flexibility as per how you want to define it. Let's say your use case is to protect sensitive personal data. Okay, in which case you can group all the different tables and fields where personal data is stored and just put them all in one policy, which means this one policy will then be your policy for protecting sensitive data. And again, linking it back to your first question around global policy and local policy, let's assume you have multiple such systems where you have personal data. You can just define one policy, club all the tables and fields, and point it to all your systems where you think that personal data is stored, and one policy will then cover everything. Okay, whereas you could have different use cases where you say in some system there are different tables and fields versus the other system. So in that case, if you want, you can define individual policies.
Okay, thanks, Nitin. I have another question that since we demonstrated the solution working with SAP, whether there's non-SAP options or what those non-SAP options would be, I would say yes, there are non-SAP options. Depending on the technology you're using, there may be a ready-to-go plugin available, or we may need to develop an integration. But we do support ODBC as one of the options, non-SAP options. But yeah, and depending on what the specific technology you're using, we can also develop a new integration as well. And then another question is how long on average a deployment it takes. As always, the answer is it depends, but in general, as a guideline, we've had customer deployments that take sort of from kickoff to finish under 8 weeks. A lot of it does depend on the complexity of the systems that we're integrating with, but this is something that DAE is something that can be deployed within a matter of weeks. We've got another question here. It's like how ITGC system audit is taken care of if we have the NextLab solution in place.
Yeah, so you will have to include the NextLab system also as part of the ITGC scope. Okay, and it has to be done jointly, like you see the case with GRC systems. Okay, in the past, when there were no GRC systems, the whole ITGC audit for an SAP system used to be based on that SAP system itself. You used to pull out reports. Now, if you have a GRC system where access provisioning is happening from GRC, you would not go and pull data or reports from the underlying system. Rather, you would want to audit the controls over the GRC system, that the configuration, the workflows, all the setup is there, and there is no bypassing and creating a user. In the same way, there will be audits needed for the NextLab system to ensure that the auditors can place a reliance that if the policy is defined, it is controlling the access or it is driving it in the same way. So like Ashwin was showing, to a certain set of user, the system was blocking creation of sales orders for a certain company code or a type of materials. So you will have to prove to the auditors that once a policy is defined, it is tested. And once it's deployed, there is a proper change management and testing, and nobody can just play around with the policy. And so whatever is there in the policy is what gets applied to the system, irrespective of whatever user has as access through roles or privileges, it will get overwritten.
Great, thanks, Nitin.
Yeah, there is a complete, sorry, Tony, next question also I am taking up. Do we have audit log? Yes, there is a detailed audit log, not just of policy changes, but also for what has been denied and allowed to each user. So each transaction that goes through the Next Lab solution, as in, let's say you are doing 10 different activities on the SAP system, say this hour, and all 10 will go through the Next Labs checks. You will have a record of all those 10, as well as any policy change or any configuration change. The system has audit log for everything.
Great, thanks. Pausing here, seeing if there's any more questions. I'll just mention again that this webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive a link to the video of the webinar within the next couple of days. Do feel free to forward that to anyone that you think would find it valuable or useful. And if, as always, if you do have any questions, follow-up questions, you can always reach out to either Next Labs and or Infosys for further clarifications. I'll open it up as well now to Nitin and Ashwin to add any additional comments that they may have on either what they've seen in their experience with customers, or just really anything else that they want to add for additional color to the to what we've presented.
So just one last thing from my side, the solution has, I mean, we just demonstrated one way of using the solution for joint ventures and divestitures. Solution can be used creatively for multiple different things. So please feel free if you have any question in mind or any scenario which you want to explore, whether it can be met through this solution, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to help.
Yeah, sure. Just to add one more point from my side as well, so Ashwin here, is that also the solution is almost pretty much a no-code approach for authorization controls in SAP as well. So traditionally in the SAP, you'll have to create your authorization role, assignment of roles, and you have to include them in your transactions or in your custom bespoke programs. But with the Next Lab solution, because it's more data-centric, so it avoids all the ABAP implementations or the coding part in the SAP ERP system itself. So this is more of an easy to maintain as well as easy to scale approach for the SAP solution. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Ashwin. With that, I don't see any more open questions. Again, you can always follow up with us afterwards, but look out for an email with a link to the recording within the next couple of days. And with that, I want to say thanks again to everyone for joining us, and hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. And then cheers. Bye.